Hello everybody, welcome back to another lesson. Today we are going to talk about adding real numbers. So up to this point with our four operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, we've dealt exclusively with positive numbers or zero. Well, today we're going to bring negative numbers into the mix, and we're going to focus mainly on addition today. Next lesson will be subtraction with them, but let's start out with scenario one. Positive and positive. Since we are adding numbers, both numbers will be positive. Let's say we have 5 plus 7. We already know that it's 12. We know if we add two positive numbers, we're going to get a positive number. So if you have plus a positive number, that's going to be equal to a positive number. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on adding positive numbers. We've been doing that since basic 1. We don't have to do that. That's pretty simple. Now how about if both numbers are negative? We have negative plus a negative. So let's say we have negative 12 plus negative 7, right? Whenever you have plus a negative, that is equal to minus. So plus a negative equals minus. On the opposite side, if you have minus a plus, you would also have minus. So what you can do, there's a trick for negative numbers. What you want to do is take the absolute value of both numbers if they're both negative, right? So we'll have the absolute value of negative 12 plus the absolute value of negative 7, which is going to be equal to 12 plus 7. The absolute value brackets act just like parentheses. So you would focus on what's in those absolute value brackets. So the absolute value of negative 12 is 12. The absolute value of negative 7 is 7. It would look like positive 19. However, your original equation, both terms are negative. In the end, you're just going to tack on a negative sign in front of your result you get from the absolute value equation. So the answer would be negative 19. I got a couple more examples of that. How about we have negative 37 plus negative 52, right? Negative 37 plus negative 52. Again, what you want to do, if both numbers are negative, when both numbers are negative, you want to take the absolute value of both numbers, add them together. So you'll have the absolute value of negative 37 plus the absolute value of negative 52, which the absolute value of negative 37 is positive 37. You'll still have plus, then the absolute value of negative 52 is 52. So then you add these two together, 52 plus 37, that's going to be equal to 89. However, since you're in the original equation, since both terms are negative, you'll just tack on a negative sign in front of that 89. So your answer would be negative 89. Let's see here. Let's deal with a couple negative decimals. Let's say we have negative 1.01 plus negative 0.99. All right. Well, good news is both of these numbers are negative that we're adding. So we can do like we did with the whole numbers. We could take the absolute value of these decimal numbers. You'll have the absolute value of negative 1.01 plus the absolute value of negative 0.99, which would, when we do the absolute value, you would get positive 1.01 plus positive 0.99, which would actually happen to equal 2. It'd be 2.00, which is just 2. But since both terms of the original equation are negative, you're going to throw a negative sign in front of the 2. So your answer would be negative 2. So yes, this also works on decimals too. I think that's pretty self-explanatory with decimals. Now let's say we have fractions. Negative 5/6 plus, we'll say, negative 2/3. Right? We have the fractions negative 5/6 plus negative 2/3. Well, start out by taking the absolute value of these fractions. So absolute value does in fact work on fractions. You'll have the absolute value of negative 5/6 plus the absolute value of negative 2/3. Okay? What you're going to do next, of course, take their absolute values. You'll have positive 5/6 plus positive 2/3. Now we're adding fractions. They don't have the same denominator. We need to make them both have the same denominator. So we need to figure out the least common denominator between 6 and 3. In this case, it would be 6. So we'll leave the 5/6 alone. But we would need to multiply 3 by 2 to get a denominator of 6. So you'll have a denominator 6, which means you have to multiply the numerator 2 by 2 to even it out and get an equivalent expression. So 2 times 2 is 4. So you'd have 5 plus 4, 5/6 plus 4/6 equals 9/6, which 9/6 we know, 9/6, if you want to figure it out as a mixed number instead of an improper fraction, you could leave it, you could reduce it to figure out what factors do 9 and 6 have in common. They have a common 3. You divide both the numerator and denominator by 3, you'll get 3 halves. Can you see that far? Okay, you can. You'll have 3 halves, which we know to be 1.5. Because 2 goes into 3 one time, and then you have an extra remainder of 1, so it'd be 1.5. But at the end, since both the terms of the original equation were negative, you'd have negative 1/2. Or negative 3 halves. Depending upon how your teacher likes it, you would have either negative 1/2 or negative 3 halves, depending upon how your teacher likes it. So we can do negative fractions too. You just do it the same way you did when they were positive, only at the end you just tack on a negative sign if both terms were negative. Okay. So far we have seen positive and positive. I didn't need to spend too much time on that. We've seen negative and negative scenarios. Now we have 2 cases for if we have a positive and a negative number. So positive plus negative case 1. Okay. So there are two types of cases when you're adding positive and negative numbers together. The biggest one here is when you have an equation like this. Let's say you have 52 plus negative 17. So 52 is positive, negative 17, of course, is negative. Now, what you first want to do before you even try to find the solution, when you have a positive or a negative number, a positive and a negative number combined in an addition equation, you first want to determine the nature of the solution before you even take the solution. Well, how do you do that? You take the absolute value of both expressions. The absolute value of 52, well, that's just 52. You take the absolute value of negative 17, that's positive 17, okay? If the bigger number is positive in your original equation, if the bigger absolute value is positive in your original equation, if the bigger number is positive, you're going to get a positive answer. For example, then, we're dealing with 52 minus 17, or 52 plus negative 17. Remember, we said plus a negative is the same as a negative. So that translates into 52 minus 17. Plus a negative is minus. So 52 plus negative 17 equals 52 minus 17, which is now simple math. That would just be 35. Indeed, keeping in true fashion with if the bigger absolute value was originally positive in the original equation, you're going to get a positive answer. So, yes, 52 plus negative 17 is the exact same as 52 minus 17, which is 35. I got some more examples of case 1 here. I know it can get a little confusing when working with negative numbers, but if you can first determine the nature of your solution, that is going to help you immensely, okay? Let's say I have 101 plus negative 87, right? I have 101 plus negative 87. Well, since we have a positive and a negative together in an addition equation, first thing you want to do again, determine the nature of your solution before you determine the solution itself. So take the absolute value of both terms, right? The absolute value of 101, that's 101. Then take the absolute value of negative 87. Well, the absolute value of negative 87 equals 87. The bigger number, the absolute value in the original equation, is positive. Therefore, you will get a positive solution. So let's say then we have 101, right? Plus negative 87. Well, we know that if it's plus a minus, that's the same as minus. So 101 plus negative 87 is equal to 101 minus 87. Which now we just have a simple subtraction problem. It equals 14. So that the answer to 101 plus negative 87 is equal to 14. Positive 14. All right. Let's say we have 13.92 plus negative 6.51, right? So I'm going to throw in a decimal one here. We have 13.92 plus negative 6.51. Since again you have a positive and a negative number together in an addition equation, first take their absolute values of each term. So the absolute value of 13.92 is equal to 13.92, right? Let's also take the absolute value of negative 6.51. Well, the absolute value of negative 6.51 is positive 6.51. What we're trying to do here first, before we even try to find the solution itself, is determine the nature of the solution. Is it going to be positive or negative? Well, remember, if the bigger absolute value is positive in the original equation, then you're going to get a positive result. So let's rewrite this equation. You'll have 13.92 plus negative 6.51. When you have plus a minus, that is simply minus. So that would be the same as 13.92 minus 6.51. So what you got here is a simple subtraction problem. The answer to that would be 7.41. So you would get positive 7.41 for your answer to 13.92 plus negative 6.51. Alright, and what would it be if I didn't throw in a fraction? I got to throw in a fraction problem. Let's say I have 5/8 plus negative 1/3. 5/8 plus negative 1/3, right? Well, again, before you proceed to trying to find the solution, you want to find the nature of the solution, so you'll take the absolute value of 5/8, which would actually equal 5/8, and then of course you'll take the absolute value of negative 1/3. Well, that would equal positive 1/3. So we got to determine which one's bigger. Definitely the 5/8. And sticking to true fashion, if the absolute value of the bigger number, if the bigger number absolute value is positive in the original equation, you're going to get a positive answer. So we can rewrite this equation. 5/8 plus negative 1/3 is equal to, since we have plus minus, that'd simply be equal to 5/8 minus 1/3. Now we have a simple subtraction of fractions. We can go for a common denominator to perform this. And the only common denominator between 8 and 3 is 24. That's the least common denominator. So to get there, to get the least common denominator of 24, you'll have to multiply 8 times 3, which means you got to multiply 5 times 3 in the numerator. Then you'll have minus, in order to make 3 into 24, you got to multiply by 8, which means you got to multiply that 1 in the numerator by 28 by 8, excuse me. Let's move this over here. So you'll have 5 times 3 is 15 over 24 minus, then let's do 1 times 8, that's 8 over 24. Now you're left with 15 24ths minus 8 24ths. That would be 7 24ths. And 7 and 24 do not factor any further since they don't have any factors in common. So your answer would be 7 24ths. So you see, we took this problem and turned it into a simple subtraction problem. Okay. And you could do this endlessly, okay? Let's say, now we're going to move on to the second case of addition with positive and negative numbers. Case 2 is when, let's say, I have something like negative 101 plus 87. Of course, like you would in case 1, what you're going to want to do first, what you can do first, like you would in case 1, take the absolute value of each term, because you want to find the nature of your solution first. You're going to have the absolute value of negative 101, that's positive 101. The absolute value of positive 87, well, that's just positive 87, right? Okay. Now, look at the absolute value of your two terms. If the absolute value of the bigger number in the original equation is negative, as it is in this case, the absolute value of the term 101, the greater number, is negative, you're going to get a negative result if the bigger term's absolute value is negative in the original equation. There is a trick to that. So you have negative 101 plus 87, right? We've already determined that the bigger absolute value, being negative 101, is the bigger number. It's negative, so you're going to get a negative result. What you can do to trick the system temporarily is you can transpose that into, you can switch the terms, you can transpose that into 101 minus 87, which would give you 14. However, at the end, you got to throw a negative number on at the beginning. So you can temporarily, whenever you have these type, when the absolute value of the bigger number is negative, meaning you're going to get a negative result, you could temporarily switch places, make the 101 positive, the 87 negative, and have a simple subtraction problem of 14. But to get your final result, you throw a negative sign on the front, which would give you negative 14 for your answer. And yes, we're going to go over more of these. We will definitely go over more of these. Let's say I have negative 35 plus 26, right? I want to do negative 35 plus 26. Well, again, before we find the solution itself, let's find the nature of the solution. So take the absolute value of each term. Well, the absolute value of negative 35 is positive 35. The absolute value of positive 26, well, that's just going to be positive 26. Find the bigger absolute value result. In this case, it's 35. If your bigger absolute value result, in this case being 35, is negative, if the bigger number absolute value is negative, you're going to get a negative result. So let's rewrite this as negative 35 plus 26 as it originally was. What you can temporarily do is switch this. You can have 35 minus 26, which would just be equal to 9. But since we determined that the solution was going to be negative, you just got to throw a negative on front of the 9. Your answer would be negative 9 for the solution. Alright, let's do another whole number one here. And then we'll deal with a decimal one, and then we'll do a fraction one. Okay. Let's do an easier one. Negative 117 plus 17. Negative 117 plus 17. Well, you have, again, you want to take the absolute value of the two numbers to determine the nature of your solution. The absolute value of negative 117 is positive 117. The absolute value of 17 is, well, 17, right? So looking at the absolute value of the bigger number, if the bigger number in the equation is negative, that means your answer will also be negative. So let's rewrite the equation. Negative 117 plus 17. You can temporarily pull that dupe trick I taught you. Switch places, make 117 minus 17. In which case we know 117 minus 17 is 100. But since we determined that it's a negative solution, you're just going to throw a negative in front of the 100. Your answer to this problem would be negative 100. Alright. Now, let's see here. Let's say we have negative 3.98 plus 1.72. We got negative 3.98 plus 1.72. Well, let's go ahead again, find the nature of your solution first. Take the absolute value of negative 3.98, which would give you positive 3.98. And then take, of course, the absolute value of 1.72, which would give you 1.72. Alright. Now, look at these two numbers here. Look at both terms. Look at which absolute value is bigger. In this case, 3.98. If the bigger absolute value in the equation is negative, you will get a negative result. So we can rewrite this problem down below again. You have negative 3.98 plus 1.72. Remember that temporary trick you can pull. You can switch places, make 3.98 positive, and then make 1.72 negative. So you'll end up with 3.98 minus 1.72. That should equal, let's see, that should be 2.26. But since we determined that the solution to this equation was going to be negative, you will end up with negative 2.26. So the result of this equation is negative 2.26. If you remember when pulling that temporary trick to just put a negative sign for your final result, you'll have the answer. Okay. Now, let's say you have negative 3/5 plus 1/4. So you got negative 3/5 plus 1/4. Again, take the absolute value of your two terms. So you'll have the absolute value of negative 3/5. That's going to give you positive 3/5. Take the absolute value of 1/4. You'll get positive 1/4. Okay? Now, look at your two absolute values. If the bigger number in the original equation is negative, you're going to get a negative result. So we can rewrite this problem again. Negative 3/5 plus 1/4. Well, we can pull that temporary trick here. We can reverse it temporarily to make it 3/5 minus 1/4. But of course we got a fraction. We need a common denominator. The common denominator, the least common denominator between 5 and 4 is 20. So in order to make that 5 into a 20, you have to multiply by 4. You'll have to multiply 5 times 4, which means you also got to multiply the numerator of 3 times 4. Minus, okay, in order to get that 4 into a 20, you got to multiply that by 5. Minus 4 times 5, which means you got to multiply that numerator of 1 times 5. You'll get 1 times 5. Now we just work through our multiplication. I'll bring that over here. You'll get 3 times 4 is 12 over 20 minus the next term, you'll get 5 over 20. Now that we've got like terms, we can, yeah, we got the same base, the same denominator. We can go ahead and do subtraction, which will give you 7/20. But remember, since we determined the solution to this equation is going to be negative, your actual answer would be negative 7/20. So your actual answer is negative 7/20, because you have to remember when doing that temporary switch to, at the end, throw a negative sign on in the front. So that was case 2 of positive and negative numbers together. Now, a real quick one here. We're going to talk about the additive inverse. The additive inverse property. Whenever you add any number plus its inverse, its opposite, you'll get 0. Well, that makes sense. Like, let's say we have 5 plus negative 5, right? It's a number plus its opposite, 5 plus negative 5. Well, plus a negative, that's the same as minus. Anything minus itself equals 0. I don't think I need to spend too much time on that one, because we kind of already covered this in Basic 1. We just put a different spin on it here in Basic 2. Now that we're dealing with negative numbers, if you add a number plus its opposite, you'll always get 0, because it's the same as doing the number minus itself. It turns into the exact same thing. So we covered today, of course, about adding 2 positive numbers. We didn't spend too much time on that. There was no need to. It's what we've been doing all along. We added 2 negative numbers by simply taking the absolute value, adding them together, and then throwing a negative sign on the front of the result. We did the 2 scenarios for adding positive and negative numbers. We first determined the solution of, we determined the nature of the solution by taking the absolute values of both terms of the equation. And the first case was if the absolute value of the bigger number, if that number being the bigger number was positive in the equation, you're going to get a positive result. If in case 2, the absolute value, the bigger number, so the bigger number being the absolute value was negative in the original equation, you'll get a negative result. And you can temporarily switch which numbers are positive and negative and make it a simple subtraction problem. You just have to remember to throw a negative sign on your result. So that covers addition of real numbers. Next lesson will be subtraction of real numbers, where you'll learn another property. So stay tuned for that. I hope everyone has a good night. Take care.